I cannot overstate how much I don't feel like editing right now. So we're going to try to do this in one take. And if you see any cuts, mind your business. So this is the mid-year book freakout tag. This was the very first video I ever made on my YouTube channel. And seeing as that is the 1 year anniversary of this little channel, might as well do it again. We love symmetry. So the first prompt in this tag is, what was the best book of 2020? And I'm starting off by cheating because I'm picking two. I am going to pick Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde and The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Both of these books are collections of essays, which is why I feel a little bit more justified in choosing them, because it's not like every single essay in both of these books changed my life or revolutionized the way I think about Black activism, but there were individual essays, individual quotes, individual moments of just profound clarity, moments of validation, moments of kind of painful challenging that really got me thinking, really got me appreciating the value of reading some of these famous quotes in the context of the essay in which they were written, with the footnotes of who this person was speaking to and why and what inspired it. As much as I value and appreciate the internet, especially those who are sharing information about activists and authors and artists that I otherwise wouldn't have known, I think there is something to be said if you have only interacted with Audre Lorde through a Pinterest quote or through someone referencing her in a Twitter argument. I think it is so important to go to the source when it comes to this work. And I know that I am definitely more empathetic, definitely more knowledgeable, and just overall just richer for it, for actually having read her words and read James Baldwin's words and got an opportunity to be exposed to things that kind of don't make it to social media. Certain quotes that perhaps aren't as pithy and famous, but were equally as impactful, at least for me. So I have a bunch of screenshots on my phone of individual quotes that I'd love to, talk about one day. But to talk about them would also mean to be quite vulnerable and why they impacted me the way they did. And I'm still deciding where my boundary is when it comes to vulnerability and privacy on the internet. But those are my two best books of 2020. The next prompt is, what was the best sequel of 2020? And just like the last time I did this, I technically haven't read any sequels, or I have, but not in the way you're supposed to, because the only book I can pick for this is Mind of My Mind by Octavia Butler. This book is one installment in the Patternist series. However, that series was written and published out of order. However, Mind of My Mind is the second book chronologically and the second book in terms of publishing order. And while it was not my favorite Octavia Butler book, it did get me invested enough in these characters. It did get me invested enough in certain questions around who am I? Who was I made to be? And how responsible am I for the harm that I caused when I did not ask to be put in this situation? Because you have this entire community of people with very special abilities in regards to healing or hurting, telepathy or telekinetics, all intentionally created by one person, one very powerful ancient person who has very selfish means for the reasons why he wants a community. And especially you're introduced to people who, because they did not receive a certain level of guidance, because biologically they have not reached a certain level of maturation, the abilities that lay dormant within them are actually causing just an immense amount of harm to them and to other people in terms of mental illness, in terms of anger issues. It's a very interesting story. And while I wasn't, as I said, completely blown away by the writing, especially because this was one of the books published earlier in her career, I am really invested now in the Patternist series mythology, in these interconnecting families and generations of individuals that all affect this universe in different ways. So I did read a sequel and I did like this sequel, but seeing as I haven't read the first book in the series, either chronologically or in terms of publishing order, does it count? I'm going to make it count. The next prompt is, what is a new release I haven't read yet? And I'm going to choose the final revival of Opal and Nev. Now, I'm not supposed to be buying books as per my 2021 channel and reading goals, but I pre-ordered this book after reading an article by this author in Essence magazine. And the entire article was highlighting her and other Black women who have pivoted. These are women who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, later in their career, women who already had very successful businesses or franchises or, career trajectories, who chose to do something different and also explained how they did those things. And so I was really inspired by this author's story. I knew nothing about the book Opal and Nev whatsoever, but I pre-ordered it because pre-ordering really does help authors, and it's her debut novel. So I got one chapter into this book and I'm already quite interested in it. I think the simplest way to describe it is that you have this woman who is a journalist, who is invested in music culture, who does a lot of writing and publicity and such, getting the really exclusive, amazing opportunity to interview this aging, glamorous, controversial rock star and activist. But beyond that relationship, that rock star, that activist, was the main character's father's lover, and some would argue the reason that her father is dead. So there is a lot of personal things involved in this. There's a lot of questions of legacy and memory and who tells our stories and how those stories are told. So I have not read it yet, but I am very much interested in it, even though it's like a genre and a concept. Like, I know some people really like reading books about the music industry or really like reading books that are about writing. This is very new for me, but I think I'm going to enjoy it, so I'm excited to read it. The next question is, what are your most anticipated releases for 2021? And again, I have none. I wouldn't have even known about Opal and Nev if I wasn't reading Essence magazine. So no other books that are coming out this year that I'm super excited for. After that, we have what was my biggest disappointment of the year, and that has been Abarat by Clive Barker. Although part of that is my fault because expectations are finicky things. So I read Abarat when I was a teenager. I remember loving it. You know, the world building, the fantasy stories, all the beautiful illustrations. Barker is a very talented visual artist as well as author, and did over 100 oil paintings for the series that are inside this book. However, reading it again this year was not a good experience. There were certain things in the way that he described characters of color. There are certain ways that he stitched together action that I felt were kind of fell into those tropes of like the chosen one, you know, the young teenage girl who suddenly has the ability to perform magic perfectly the very first time she does it. But overall, even though I was interested in the plot and like what was supposed to be happening, the process of reading it was not enjoyable. I wasn't really moved. I wasn't really invested. Abarat is one of those stories that I did go on Wikipedia to read the end of because I was curious, but it's just not something that I was super invested in. And I think that's a shame because I do really still enjoy the idea of it. And then the next prompt after most disappointing was, what was the most surprising book that I've read so far? And that would absolutely have to go to How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. Now, a word of not caution, but acknowledgement. This title to me is pretty deceiving. And when I found the book in an airport bookstore, it was among things like digital minimalism and how to be a badass. Like, it was among a group of books that I do not feel accurately represent or reflect the type of content that's in Jenny Odell's book. She gets into romantic writers like Henry Thoreau. She gets into Epicurean philosophy, bioregionalism, the idea of individual attention contributing to collective attention and a collective attention leading to collective action. She talks about privilege and the people who live on the margins but also have a limited amount of margin when it comes to what they can take time away from, such as social media, and what they may or may not have time and access for and to, such as she talks a lot about bird watching and bird observing, bird listening as an example of the way that she has redirected her attention. Not everybody has time to wander in the woods listening for blue jays, and she acknowledges that. I think this book is really, really interesting, but it is also dense. It can get a bit esoteric, and at the end of the day, while I enjoyed it and I'm glad that I read it, again, because of the title, How to Do Nothing, and because of the other books it was shelved with, which I know is not her fault, but still, I thought I was going into it to get something different. So after the first or second chapter, when I realized, oh, no, we're going to be bouncing back and forth between various time periods. We're going to be talking about very specific moments for her in regards to her development with her redirection of attention and how that affects other people. We're going to be talking about art. We're going to be talking about the environment. We're going to be talking about activism. It just took me a minute to adjust because I had such a different expectation, because I've read other books with similar titles that are a completely different style of writing. So I would recommend it, but I would keep all of that in mind. The next prompt is, who is a favorite new author or new to you author? I'm going to pick one that fits both, and that is Karen Tucker, who wrote Bewilderness. Bewilderness was her debut novel. It was actually released this year, and I found it on NetGalley on a whim and am so happy. It is not a happy book, but it is some of the best writing I feel like I've read in a long time. It's something that had got me more excited for fiction, which I haven't been reading as much of, and her way of exploring the nuances, the ambiguity, the pain and pride and joy and devastation between these two best friends, these two women whose lives are intricately linked, who also are both addicted to opioids. it is a hard book to read. It is a book that probably would fit the other prompt in this tag of book that made me cry, even though I don't really cry at books, but it's such an amazing story, and I feel like she is able to write about people who are doing terrible things without making them sound like terrible people, because I would argue that they're not. She talks about the ways that class and poverty and limited options also play into this universe without in any way, I would argue, absolving the characters of some of the poor choices they make. And just, again, the way she talks about female friendship is just so powerful and felt so specific and just true to me, even though I've never been in a friendship such as this that also had this element of being as addicted to each other as they are to the illegal drugs that they go through such lengths to get. It is a book I absolutely want to reread, but because it is so heavy, because it has such a tragic and yet melancholy and slightly hopeful ending, because it has such intense material, so content warning for abuse, content warning for assault, content warning for, of course, drugs and addiction, it is still a fantastic piece of work, and I'm so excited to see what she does next, because to know that this was the first book that she had ever published just gets me even more excited to see what she'll do after this. We're going to go ahead and skip the next 3 questions because they are a new favorite fictional character, don't have one, new favorite fictional crush, also don't have one, and book that made you cry. As I said, don't really cry at books, but Bewilderness got me pretty close, and I definitely think if you're someone who is able to connect emotionally with fiction in that way, it will make you cry as well. So on to the next one. A book that made me happy this year was Daughter of Fortune by Isabel Allende. Again, this is a book I spoke about in my January wrap-up, so you can go watch that if you want more details. But I think what made me feel so good about it, what made that process so positive, is because I was not in a great place mentally then, and it is a book that allowed me to escape in a way that I have not escaped in a long time. I mean, it goes from China to the territories of California to Chile to other various European countries. There's a huge cast of very distinct, specific, empathetic and entertaining characters who all have their own side stories and actualizations. Allende even spends entire chapters talking about some of these supporting characters, which I've read that other people don't like. They felt it kind of took away from the main thrust of the story, but I loved it. And because it was set in a different time period with all these people in different situations that were just it gave me the opportunity to, one, learn about different cultures and people through historical fiction, which is something I haven't done in a long time, but also just transported me to all these different worlds and places and circumstances. Even if it was circumstances that I would not want to be in or want to experience, just to be able to get so mentally and emotionally removed from my current experience was a feeling akin to happiness. So I would definitely recommend Daughter of Fortune by Isabel Allende if you like adventure and romance and kind of coming of age self-actualization stories with a large cast of very interesting characters that are easy to get invested in. For most beautiful book I read this year, I could probably pick every single book that I mentioned in my video of princess stories from around the world, so I'll leave that in the description. But if I had to pick one of them specifically, I am going to shout out Virginia Hamilton and the illustrators Leo and Diane Dillon for their work on The Girl Who Spun Gold. The expressions in this book are so precise and correct, I would argue. They use a lot of gold paint, gold filigree. I was reading about how apparently those materials are very difficult to work with, but they felt it was so important to actually include gold in the paintings, in the illustrations, considering The Girl Who Spun Gold is a Rumpelstiltskin-like story. So of course, gold is pretty much a main character in it. Like the richness and the sheen and the depth of all the dark, beautiful skin, the intricate robes, the very, very, I'm going to say, aggressive movement and vibrant colors of the scenes that have the little magical man. I think that it all just really enhanced the story and really, again, made me want to just like tear out a page and frame it and like put it up in my living room. Like that's how beautiful I think Leo and Diane Dillon's illustrations are in many, many books, but especially The Girl Who Spun Gold. We are nearing the end, so now here comes the confession portion. The next question is books you're supposed to read or want to read by the end of the year. I made an entire video about my 2021 TBR and I regret it. I am in a completely different place now than I was when I made that list. And although there are books on that list, like a collection of stories by H.P. Lovecraft, a nonfiction book about the history of Atlanta called Where Peachtree Meets Sweet Auburn, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, The Island of Sea Women, books and stories that still interest me now. I look at them on my shelves and I am excited to get to them at some point. But there are a lot of other things that have come up between now and then that I want to read and that I have been reading, on top of course, my schoolwork. So those are some books that I'm supposed to be getting to. I don't know if I will or if I will not, but I can tell you this, I probably will not be making a TBR video again. And I have read some of the books on the list. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I haven't ignored all of them. I think I read 5 or 6 so far. But my timeline about how many I'm supposed to have read by now is definitely off. But there are some gems in there, so we'll see if I ever get to them. And the final question for this tag is, what was the best book-to-movie adaptation that I have watched so far this year? And this was actually a fun one to think about because I've watched a lot of movies this year that are based on books. I watched the entire Harry Potter series, the entire Bourne series, the Emma 2020 remake, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, and various anime movies that, of course, were based on manga. That being said, I haven't read any of that manga or any of those books. I did read most of the Harry Potter books years ago, but I have no memory of them, so how could I compare them to the films? And while I did have a lot of fun with movies like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, while I was surprised at how much I enjoyed, how much comedy there was, how much charm there was in the Emma 2020 remake, I say surprised only because, again, I haven't read the book, I didn't know what to expect. I feel like this question is more about how well did the movie adapt the book. So that is all I have. Happy anniversary to me. I'll see if I do anything special for a 1-year anniversary, but I think this might be it. Let me know if you have any ideas though, and I look forward to seeing all of your mid-year book freakout tags. Bye.